In this video, we'll look at the button as a UI component, one of the most useful of UI components available. The button lets us choose something, clicking on it to select something as part of the user interface. It's important to understand the possibilities of the button and all the different elements that go into it, as well as how to access that button in script. We'll create a button by choosing Game Object, UI, and Button from the top menu. Alternately, you can create a button in the inspector, clicking on Add Component, and again choosing UI and Button. One of the main differences in creating the button from the top menu versus Add Component is that this button created from the top menu has a default button image in it. A button created from the Add Component menu here in the inspector does not. You have to put one in. When we look at this button, and I'll select my button here in the scene view and press F to frame in on that selection, we can see that that button has an interactable checkbox. Can we interact with that button? This lets us, if we need, turn off interaction for a certain time. Maybe the button's not available until the player achieves a certain status. We can also see that the button has a target graphic and different transition methods listed here under the drop-down for color tint. There are 4 available: None, Color Tint, Sprite Swap, and Animation. Right now what this says is the normal color tint of the button is white, referring to this button image. When it's highlighted in-game, there's a highlight color tinting over. I've made it red so we can see it here in the game view. When it's pressed, tint another color, and finally, choose a disabled color. Additionally, all of these colors have a multiplier and a strength, plus a fade duration in seconds. What happens then is we can set the different states for our button and consider carefully how we're marking different elements of our UI for easy recognition. I'll press play and see how that button looks. I'm here in my player selection menu, and we can see when I mouse over that button, it turns red, as I've selected that highlight color as red. When I click on the button, the down state, the light gray, pressed, flashes briefly, and if it were to be disabled, it would be gray. The other transitions available for a button, then, are None, Sprite Swap, and Animation. None says that there's no transition. It's simply an image that we click on that functions as a button. There's no change in states to let us know we've clicked on it. We'll use the None transition option later when we construct our ally buttons for the game. We'll take a look at Sprite Swap next. What Sprite Swap does, as the name suggests, is allow you to swap in different sprites for a button. Instead of transitioning the button by tinting colors over a base image, this allows you to change sprites. There may be actually different states viewable as a graphic here. Perhaps the button, when it's highlighted, is drawn to stand out, and the pressed button actually forms a splatter. It's up to you how you want to configure this. As long as we're bringing in an image marked as a sprite, you can use it as one of the transition states in Sprite Swap. The last state, then, is Animation. What this lets us do is to create an animation for that button, either doing it through sprites that we'll bring in or automatically generate an animation. Each of these, then, lists a button animation, and we can create our own if we'd like. When we click Auto-Generate Animation, it wants to make a button.controller. In this case, it's an animator controller in the Assets folder for our button. Clicking Save and then choosing Window and Animator will show us that animation. What we're seeing here is a state machine. This state machine, then, controls the different animations and allows us to map in a motion for that button if we'd like. There's those default motions. Right now it's going to be the default of disabled, highlighted, normal, and pressed, but we can swap in any different states we want so that that button can wiggle if somebody is highlighting it, as drawn in an animation. It can also flatten out like a gelatin when somebody presses on it. The possibilities are endless and really guided by the UI design chosen for that game. All buttons have an on-click event. What this lets us do is script an interaction, saying when that button is clicked, do something. In order for a button's on-click event to access a variable in a script, it must be public. The default list for a button is empty, meaning that there's nothing chosen when we click on it. When we click on the plus here on the bottom of the on-click list, we'll have different objects available for access. What this will let us do then is access our Game Manager, saying in this case, when the button is clicked, do something to the Game Manager. When we choose an object here, such as our Game Manager or Ally Manager, any public variables will be available, and we can script to them. Remember, in order for a variable to be accessed by a button's onClick event, it must be public. So when you're scripting your button interactions, make sure to mark those variables as such, so buttons can see them, and we can choose and create that interaction.